The funeral of millionaire Charles Davenport, 72, had barely ended when whispers began to rise through the grand marble halls of his mansion. The chandeliers still glittered with cold light, and the heavy scent of lilies mixed with something sharper: anticipation. Everyone knew the old man's will was about to be read, but no one could have predicted the storm it would unleash. At the long oak table, his daughter Catherine Davenport, 45, sat rigidly, her pearls gleaming like a shield. Beside her, her husband Edward wore the smug half-smile of a man who thought he knew the outcome. Across from them lounged her brother, Michael, 48, suntanned and restless, tapping his gold watch against the wood. They were the heirs, or so they believed. But at the far end of the room, almost invisible in her simple black coat, sat Amelia Brooks, 50, the family's long-serving maid. Her calloused hands clutched an old leather purse to her chest. To anyone else, she was just the help. Yet when the lawyer broke the seal of the envelope, the air froze. "I, Charles Henry Davenport, being of sound mind," the lawyer began, his voice steady. The room leaned in. The first bequests were ordinary: donations, scholarships, symbolic gifts. Michael rolled his eyes. Catherine tightened her jaw. But then came the line that cracked the silence like thunder. "And the entirety of my estate, including Davenport Industries, the mansion, the Aspen and Martha's Vineyard properties, and all trust accounts, I leave to my loyal caretaker, Amelia Brooks." The air turned electric. Catherine's hand trembled against her pearls. Michael shot out of his chair. "This is a joke, right? Where are the cameras?" Amelia lowered her eyes, clutching her purse tighter. For a moment, it seemed the whole world was waiting for her to vanish. But this was no mistake, no trick. This was the beginning of a battle no one in that room was prepared for. If you like it, please subscribe and comment. If you don't like it, please like. The silence after the lawyer's announcement was almost unbearable. It was not the quiet of respect, but the suffocating pause before an eruption. Catherine's lips parted, though no sound came out. Michael paced like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. Edward scribbled frantically in his notebook, percentages dissolving into nonsense. And Amelia Brooks, still in her modest coat, sat perfectly still, as though she had braced for this storm long before it arrived. The lawyer, Mr. Harrington, cleared his throat gently, his tone measured, unshaken by the disbelief swirling around him. "The will," he said, "was dated and reaffirmed just 8 months ago. It carries full legal validation, supported by medical documents confirming Mr. Davenport's capacity of mind at the time." Michael barked out a laugh. "Capacity?" He was barely walking by then. "You expect us to believe he was in his right mind when he handed over a billion-dollar empire to—" His hand shot in Amelia's direction, as though the very word "maid" was beneath him. Amelia's shoulders stiffened, but she said nothing. Before Michael could continue, Harrington raised another sheet of paper. "There is also a recording left by Mr. Davenport. He requested it be played before any further discussions. It is his condition that the recording be heard first, in private with Mrs. Brooks present, and only afterward may a final letter be read publicly." The siblings exploded at once. Catherine's voice was cold steel. "This is absurd. If there's a letter, read it now. My father never played games." Harrington's eyes met hers calmly. "This was his explicit instruction, Mrs. Davenport, and it is not negotiable." All eyes turned to Amelia. For a heartbeat, she wished she could disappear into the carpet. But somewhere inside, in the echo of memories, late nights of tea at 8 p.m., quiet chess moves called out when his hands could no longer move the pieces, she found her answer. "I'll hear it," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "Now." Catherine smirked, folding her arms. "Of course you will. You've played your role perfectly." The lawyer excused himself, stepping out, and returned moments later carrying a small wooden case Amelia knew well. It was Davenport's box for his favorite pen and his old voice recorder. When Harrington placed it on the table, the room seemed to draw tighter, the chandeliers flickering in a draft of invisible tension. He pressed play. At first, only static hissed through the speaker. Then the voice, aged, heavy, but still bearing the warmth Amelia remembered. filled the room. "Amelia," Charles Davenport began, "if you are hearing this, then my hands are no longer steady enough to pour the tea you always said at 8, and I am not here to tell you this in person." Michael flinched, jaw tightening. Catherine's nails dug into the armrest. "I know what they will say," the recording continued, "that I was confused, that I was influenced. But you, Amelia, you stayed when no one else did. When my children flew across oceans for vacations, you sat by my bedside. When my hands shook, yours steadied them. When my mind faltered, you read me stories, chapter by chapter until sleep came. You reminded me of dignity when I had none." Amelia covered her mouth, tears pricking her eyes. The memories rushed in, the sound of his frail voice asking for another passage from the old man and the sea, his quiet smile when she placed the scarf across his shoulders, the countless nights she reheated Christmas turkey for 2 when the family never showed. The voice pressed on. "I do not give this inheritance as punishment. I give it as reward for care, for loyalty, for love that was never asked but always given. I ask you not to hold it like gold in a vault, but as you once held my arm in the hallway, firm, gentle, unpretentious. You know what to do, Amelia. I saw it in you long before you saw it in yourself." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, as though the mansion itself held its breath. Harrington looked at Amelia. She was trembling, but she lifted her chin, refusing to hide. Catherine broke first, her voice icy. "Touching words, but sentiment does not run companies nor preserve legacies." "This woman," she spat, refusing to say Amelia's name, "is unprepared. She is not family. She cannot handle decisions of this magnitude." Harrington did not flinch. Mr. Davenport was of sound mind, and this was his desire. The documents stand. Michael slammed his palm on the table. "And where does that leave us? His blood? His name?" No one answered. For a long moment, Amelia closed her eyes, the words of Charles echoing in her ears. Reward for care. Dignity restored. When she opened them, her gaze fell on the empty armchair at the head of the table, the chair where Charles had always read his newspaper each morning. For a moment, she could almost see him there, nodding quietly, urging her forward. "I will accept his words," Amelia said softly, "and I will honor his trust." Michael laughed bitterly. "This isn't over." Edward leaned toward Catherine, whispering something sharp enough to make her eyes narrow even further. Their fury was no longer just grief. It was strategy forming. And Amelia knew then that the announcement was not the end. It was the beginning. The lawyer shuffled his papers once more. "There is, as I said, a final letter to be read publicly, but Mr. Davenport set another condition before that can happen. Mrs. Brooks must first decide if she wishes it to be read here today or at my office tomorrow in private with legal representatives present. The choice is hers." Again, the room's attention fell on Amelia, the woman who had once been invisible. She drew in a breath, steadying her voice. "Read it today," she said. "Here, the way he would want, with no shouting, no humiliation." Harrington nodded. "Very well." He unfolded a second envelope, the paper worn but steady, the ink carrying the faint smell of time. But before he could begin, the intercom buzzed, sharp and insistent. A security guard stepped inside, whispering into Edward's ear. The smug confidence drained from his face, leaving it pale and tight. "What is it?" Catherine demanded. Edward hesitated. "The press. Somehow they already know. And the bank has triggered a clause in the trust. A transfer is scheduled, contingent upon the contents of the letter being fulfilled. If not, the funds freeze." Michael's face darkened. "Freeze? What kind of game did he set up this time?" The lawyer's expression was calm, but his words landed like stones. "It appears Mr. Davenport left not just wealth, but conditions, tasks, if you will. And if they are not completed, not a single cent will go to the family." The room fell into stunned silence once more. Amelia's heart thudded in her chest. She hadn't yet seen what the letter contained, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was not going to be easy. And somewhere deep inside, she understood. Charles Davenport had not just left her an inheritance. He had left her a battle. The air inside the Davenport mansion still quivered after the lawyer's words. Tasks, conditions. The very idea sounded absurd to Catherine and Michael, yet the weight of it pressed heavily on Amelia's shoulders. She had inherited not just wealth, but responsibility, a series of promises Charles Davenport had wanted to see fulfilled even after his death. The letter was unfolded carefully by Mr. Harrington. His eyes scanned the paper before reading aloud. To my dear Amelia, if these words reach you, it means I am no longer there to remind you of the simple duties that once gave me peace. I ask you to continue what mattered most in my final days. Preserve the house as a home, not a museum. Keep the garden alive. Reopen the library for the children of this city. Support the community hospital. And finally, take my ashes to Harbor Point, that place we always dreamed of seeing together. Read to me there, as you did when I could no longer read to myself. The words trembled in the air, not because they were sentimental, but because they were binding. Harrington closed the letter, then added, the trust will only be released in full if these tasks are completed within 6 months. If not, all assets revert to a philanthropic fund. None will pass to the heirs. Michael nearly overturned his chair. 6 months of gardening and story time? This is ridiculous. We'll challenge it in court. But Catherine remained strangely quiet. Her gaze lingered on Amelia, cold and calculating, as though already plotting a different path. The very next morning, Amelia rose before dawn. The mansion felt different, haunted not by ghosts, but by expectations. She tied her scarf, filled the kettle, and began where Charles would have wanted her to, the garden. She walked past roses he had loved, past the maple tree where he once sat with a chessboard on his lap. The grass was overgrown, the fountain stagnant. To most it was decoration. To Charles it had been life. She pulled on her gloves and began working. For hours she pruned, watered, and cleared, her fingers stiff from the cold. Yet with each clipped branch, a memory returned. His laughter when she scolded him for sneaking sugar into his tea. The soft cough that followed. The way his eyes brightened when the garden bloomed in spring. By the end of the week, the roses stood taller, the fountain flowed again. Amelia felt exhausted, but a quiet pride settled in her chest. She had fulfilled the first duty. Her next task was the library. Once a grand hall of oak shelves and stained glass windows, it had been locked for years, dust settling over forgotten volumes. Charles had spoken often of opening it to children, offering them a sanctuary of stories. Amelia unlocked the door. The musty air stung her nose, but she smiled. This was no museum. It was a place meant to live again. She contacted the local school, arranged for weekend reading sessions, and invited volunteers. Within days, children's voices echoed in the halls, their laughter mixing with the rustle of pages. Amelia read aloud the same way she had read to Charles, slowly, carefully, savoring every word. One afternoon, as she finished a passage, she noticed Michael lurking by the doorway. His smirk was thin. Enjoying your new role, librarian? She closed the book gently. It's what he wanted. He leaned closer, voice dripping with menace. And what if you slip? One missed appointment, one mistake, and everything goes away. Don't forget, the world is watching. Before she could reply, he turned and left. The warning was clear. Weeks passed, each task checked with meticulous care. But obstacles soon arrived. At the hospital where Amelia was to volunteer, her name mysteriously disappeared from the registry. Staff claimed she wasn't authorized. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Panic clawed at her chest. If she failed even one condition, everything would collapse. Then a familiar voice intervened. Miss Brooks? It was Dr. Miller, an old friend of Charles who remembered Amelia from years of quiet visits. I'll vouch for you. Come in. With his help, Amelia began her weekly visits, reading to sick children, holding their hands as she once held Charles's. She documented everything, signatures, photographs, receipts. She knew the family would pounce on any weakness. One rainy night, while sorting receipts in the study, Amelia found a hidden folder in Charles's handwriting. Inside were her old letters, thank you notes, holiday cards, even scraps of paper where she'd listed books to read. At the bottom lay an envelope marked, "To be opened only when you doubt yourself." Her hands trembled. She did not open it. Not yet. but its weight reminded her she was not alone. The next morning, she noticed a man watching from across the street, gray hair slicked back, sharp suit, cold smile. When their eyes met, he tipped his hat. Later, she learned his name, Peter Lang, the family's advisor. His purpose was clear: to see her fail. The blows came swiftly. A supplier for food donations suddenly canceled. A gardener she'd hired quit after receiving anonymous threats. Even the fountain pipes were deliberately clogged. But Amelia adapted. She drove to warehouses herself, negotiated new suppliers, and fixed the fountain with her own hands. Each time the family tried to break her, she grew stronger. Still, the pressure was unrelenting. Catherine launched whispers in society circles, claiming Amelia had manipulated Charles in his final days. Rumors spread like fire. The Maid turned millionaire. The scandal of Davenport estate. Reporters camped outside the gates. Cameras flashed whenever Amelia stepped out. Yet she held her head high, remembering Charles's words. Hold it as you held my arm. Firm, without ostentation. As winter deepened, Amelia faced her hardest night, Christmas Eve. For years, Charles had insisted on celebrating with her, even when his children left for Aspen or St. Bart's. They would sit by the fireplace, tea steaming, turkey reheated, and she would read a Christmas carol. Now the chair was empty. She lit the tree, poured 2 cups of tea out of habit, and read aloud. Her voice cracked, but she kept reading until midnight. When the clock chimed, she whispered, "Merry Christmas, Charles." Tears blurred her vision, but deep down she felt him there, smiling softly. By the 5th month, only one task remained. Harbor Point, the place he had always wanted to see, the cliffs where the sea roared louder than sorrow. She placed the urn on the passenger seat of his old sedan, along with his scarf and a worn copy of The Old Man in the Sea. Driving along the coast, she remembered the chess games, the nights of fever, the quiet gratitude in his eyes. When she reached the cliffs, the wind cut sharp, gulls circling overhead. She set the urn down, wrapped the scarf around her neck, and opened the book, her voice carried against the waves. Hemingway's words blended with the sea's roar, as though Charles himself was breathing again. When she finished, she touched the urn gently. "Thank you for letting me care for you. Thank you for teaching me dignity." But the moment was shattered. 2 officers appeared, claiming she was scattering ashes illegally. Behind them, Peter Lang stepped from a black car, smirk curling. "Unfortunate mistake," he said. "Without authorization, the trust freezes." Amelia's heart raced, but she steadied her hands. From her bag, she produced a letterhead permit, signed weeks earlier by the Parks Department, arranged quietly by Dr. Miller. The officers confirmed it. Lang's smile cracked into ice. "This isn't over," he hissed. Amelia met his gaze. "It never began with you." That night, shaken but resolute, Amelia finally opened the sealed envelope she had found. Inside was a short note and a USB drive. "If you are doubting, it means the storm is fiercest. Play this not for you, but for the world. Let no one question why." Her breath caught. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring the final confrontation. The family would not stop, but she had Charles's last word, his voice, his truth, ready to silence every doubt. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into her purse. The mansion felt alive again, as if Charles himself was watching, urging her onward. The game was not just about inheritance anymore. It was about legacy, about proving that love and care could outlast greed and power. And Amelia Brooks, once invisible, was now at the center of it all, ready to defend every promise she had made. The night after Harbor Point felt endless. Amelia barely slept, the sound of waves and Charles's voice still echoing in her mind. She sat by the study lamp, the envelope now open on the desk, its contents staring back at her, the note in the small USB drive. She hadn't yet played it. The thought alone filled her with both hope and dread. By dawn, the mansion was already surrounded. Reporters clustered at the gates, cameras flashing with the hunger of vultures. Rumors had spread. The maid turned heiress, the contested will, the strange conditions. The city wanted answers. Mr. Harrington called her at 7. "Mrs. Brooks, it's time. Mr. Davenport requested the final message be heard publicly in the library at 10. The family will be present, so will the press. Amelia tightened her scarf. Then I'll be ready. At 10 sharp, the Davenport Library, once silent, now reborn with children's laughter, was transformed into a stage. Chairs lined the room, journalists whispering as if afraid to break something invisible. Microphones pointed toward the podium. Amelia walked in slowly, wearing a plain navy coat, her hair tied back. The whispers swelled. That's her. She kept her gaze steady, though her heart beat like a drum. Harrington stood by her side, calm as ever. On the table before him sat a laptop, the USB drive waiting like a loaded gun. Catherine and Michael entered moments later, flanked by lawyers in dark suits. Catherine's face was a mask of composure, but her eyes were knives. Michael's steps were sharp, impatient, as if daring anyone to stop him. Behind them in the shadows lingered Peter Lang, silent, watchful, the smile of a predator waiting for blood. The crowd hushed. Harrington spoke. At the request of the late Mr. Charles Henry Davenport, we will now hear the final part of his recorded message. He inserted the USB and pressed play. The speakers hissed, then came Charles's voice, steady, warm, tinged with the weight of farewell. If you are still listening, he said, then it means my wishes are not yet complete. Good. Every man should finish what he begins. A murmur rippled through the room. Amelia clasped her hands, tears stinging her eyes. I know there will be accusations, that I was reckless, that I was influenced. To those who say this, I ask, where were you when the nights grew long? When my hands shook too much to write? When fever made the walls swim before my eyes? Were you there? Number. The chairs at my table were filled by bodies, but empty of presence. The words sliced sharper than any accusation. Catherine's lips pressed thin. Michael's gaze dropped to the floor. But Amelia was there, Charles continued. She read to me when I could not read. She moved knights and queens across the chessboard when I could not. She stayed on Christmas Eve while others packed for Aspen. She gave me her hours, her voice, her silence. You cannot put a price on that. But if you could, it is worth everything I have. Gasps swept the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. To my children, I leave memories and lessons, which you may choose to take or abandon. To Amelia Brooks, I leave my estate, my shares, and this house, on one condition, that the library never be sold, but remain open to the public for as long as she lives. Let knowledge breathe here. Let stories live, so that others may find what I found. Dignity in words, solace in care. The recording ended. Silence fell, heavy, unrelenting. Catherine rose, her voice sharp as glass. This is sentimental manipulation. Our father was ill, vulnerable. This, she gestured toward Amelia, her pearl bracelet jangling, is theft disguised as gratitude. Michael slammed his fist on the table. We won't stand for it. We'll challenge this in court. But Harrington's tone was calm, almost serene. You may try, but every document, every medical report, every signature confirms his clarity of mind. His words are binding. Reporters fired questions, voices overlapping. Mrs. Brooks, do you believe you deserve this fortune? Did you manipulate Mr. Davenport? Catherine, how do you respond to your father's accusations of absence? Amelia did not answer. She stood quietly, her hands resting on the podium, her eyes focused on the tall windows where sunlight filtered through the glass. Lang finally stepped forward, his voice low but cutting. Public sympathy is fleeting. A maid with billions? That story won't end well for you. Think carefully, Mrs. Brooks. Step aside, or you'll regret it. His words dripped like poison, but Amelia met his gaze without flinching. This is not your story to end. Harrington raised a hand for silence. There is one final piece, he said. From his briefcase, he pulled the sealed folder Amelia had discovered earlier, the one Charles had left marked, to be opened only when you doubt yourself. Mr. Davenport instructed this be played if his decision were questioned publicly. He slid a second USB into the laptop. The screen lit with video this time, grainy but unmistakable. Charles appeared, sitting in his armchair, scarf around his neck, eyes bright though tired. To anyone who doubt, he said, let me remind you. On the last Christmas Eve of my life, who sat with me? Who read Dickens aloud while snow fell outside? It was Amelia. Ask the night nurse who gave me my medicine. Ask the doorman who saw her bring me books at 3 in the morning. She was there. My children were not. The room went still. Reporters leaned forward, hungry. Catherine's face blanched. Michael's hand trembled. This is not punishment, Charles concluded. It is reward for love that asked for nothing and gave everything. If you still believe this is injustice, then perhaps it is not my judgment you question, but your own. The video faded. Silence thundered in its place. Catherine whispered furiously to her lawyers, her mask of composure cracking. Michael stormed out, muttering curses, the cameras chasing him down the corridor. The press swarmed, shouting questions, flashes blinding. Lang lingered near the back, his face unreadable. But as the crowd dispersed, he approached Amelia once more. This isn't finished, he murmured, voice low. She looked at him calmly. For you, maybe. For Charles, it's already complete. He narrowed his eyes, then turned, disappearing into the throng. When the room finally emptied, Amelia remained by the window, looking out over the garden she had restored. In the glass, she saw not just her reflection, but the faint image of Charles in his chair, smiling gently, as though waiting for her next move on the chessboard. Harrington placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, Amelia. The trust transfers immediately. The estate is yours. But Amelia shook her head softly. It's not mine. It's his legacy. I'm only keeping the promise. The lawyer nodded. And that is why he chose you. In the weeks that followed, the mansion changed. Reporters still lingered. Gossip still flowed, but something new took root. The library filled with children, the garden bloomed brighter, the hospital received its donations on time. For the first time in years, the Davenport estate felt warm, alive, breathing. And every evening, Amelia would light a lamp in the library window, the way Charles once had in his study, a beacon that told the world. This house was no longer a fortress of wealth, but a home of stories and care. The battle had been fought in whispers, in courts of law, and in the glare of cameras. But in the end, Charles's voice had the final word. Not money, not blood, not power, care. And Amelia Brooks, once invisible, now carried that torch. The storm inside the Davenport mansion had passed, but its echoes lingered in the silence. After the final recording played, Catherine and Michael left in fury, trailed by their lawyers, their legacy reduced to whispers of absence and betrayal. The cameras caught every step, every glare, every fragment of their defeat. For Amelia, however, the battle wasn't about victory, it was about carrying the weight of a man's last wishes. In the following days, newspapers ran endless headlines. Maid inherits billion-dollar empire. Children left empty-handed. The Davenport legacy rewritten. Talk shows debated whether it was justice or scandal. But inside the mansion, Amelia focused on quieter tasks. The first thing she did was reopen the garden fully to the public. Families strolled along the rose paths. Children laughed by the fountain, and elderly neighbors found peace on the benches Charles once favored. For the first time in decades, the estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt alive. At the hospital, the donations Charles promised began flowing again. Amelia visited weekly, reading stories to the children in the wards. Some of the nurses whispered in awe, remembering her from years ago when she used to arrive quietly with books for Charles. Now she came with a sense of purpose, no longer invisible, but carrying his memory like a lantern. Catherine and Michael tried once more to contest the will, filing a lawsuit that claimed undue influence. But the recordings, medical validations, and testimonies of doctors and staff crushed their case before it even began. Judges dismissed it with a firm hand, citing the undeniable clarity of Charles's decisions. Society, too, turned its gaze. Business partners who once flattered the siblings now distanced themselves. Catherine's reputation as a poised socialite shattered. Her name appeared in tabloids with headlines of arrogance and neglect. Michael, once the globe-trotting playboy, became the subject of ridicule, his recklessness amplified under the weight of failure. Their inheritance was not wealth, but shame. And though Amelia never sought revenge, she could not ignore the poetic symmetry. Their absence during their father's life had become the measure of their loss after his death. Amelia poured her heart into restoring the Davenport mansion as Charles envisioned. The library, once dark and locked, became the beating heart of the estate. Children filled the wooden chairs, volunteers read stories under the stained glass light, and every visitor felt the warmth Charles had wanted to leave behind. She often stood by the tall windows, watching the reflection of the chessboard near the fireplace. Though the seat was empty, she sometimes imagined Charles leaning forward, scarf draped around his shoulders, whispering his favorite line, "Knight to F3, Amelia." Quiet moves win the game, and she smiled, knowing she had carried his quietest move to its rightful conclusion. Months passed, and the 6-month deadline came and went. Every condition was fulfilled, the trust released in full, not as a vault of gold, but as a river of opportunities. Amelia established the Davenport Foundation, dedicated to education, healthcare, and community projects. The mansion became both a home and a symbol, a reminder that dignity was not born of power, but of care. When the press asked her why she had taken on such a burden instead of retreating into luxury, her answer was simple: because this was never about money. It was about honoring the one person who saw me not as a servant, but as a human being. Her words resonated far beyond the city, echoing across newspapers, radio, and television. To some, she became a symbol of justice. To others, she was living proof that love and loyalty could outweigh greed. On a quiet spring evening, Amelia sat once more in the library, the sunlight soft against the shelves. She opened the worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea, the same one she had carried to Harbor Point. Reading aloud, she felt the room fill with echoes, children's laughter, the rustle of pages, the faint memory of Charles's voice. She paused, resting her hand on the book, her eyes drifting to the window where the garden bloomed in full. For the first time in her life, Amelia did not feel like a maid, or an heiress, or a woman defending herself against the world. She felt like what Charles had always seen her as, a keeper of dignity, a guardian of legacy. The mansion no longer belonged to one man's pride or one family's greed. It belonged to something greater: care, community, and memory. And in that quiet, Amelia knew the battle was truly over. Spring deepened, and the Davenport mansion stood transformed. No longer a fortress of silence and greed, it had become a place of voices, children laughing in the library, neighbors strolling the garden paths, volunteers reading stories beneath colored glass. The house breathed again. Amelia often walked its halls quietly, her hands brushing the wood panels she had polished for years. Yet now each step felt different. She was not walking as the invisible maid anymore, but as the guardian of a legacy built not on wealth, but on care. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she paused at the tall window of the library. Beyond the glass, the roses bloomed just as Charles had loved them. In the reflection, she imagined him seated in his armchair, scarf around his neck, smiling with the gentle pride of a man whose final move had been the right one. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You see, Charles, your legacy is safe." The world had debated whether Charles's decision was justice or folly, but for Amelia, and for all who witnessed the transformation, the answer was clear. True inheritance is not measured in dollars, but in dignity. Charles had left more than money. He had left a lesson that sometimes the greatest wealth is found in the quiet acts of care, in the presence of those who stay when everyone else walks away. And Amelia, once unseen, had proven that loyalty and kindness can outlast power and greed. As the lamps of the library glowed into the night, Amelia opened The Old Man and the Sea once more. Her voice rose steady, blending with the wind outside, carrying a message not just to the children in the room, but to anyone willing to listen. Care is the wealth no one can steal. Love is the legacy no court can overturn. Did this story move you? Then share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Charles's decision was fair? And let me know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget, subscribe and stay with us for more inspiring stories. Because sometimes the quietest acts of love can change everything.